Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Aesop Rock and TOBACCO called Malibu Ken. Ooh, I've been looking forward to this one. And yes, this review might be a little bit later than you would otherwise expect, but for Aesop Rock, I wanted to give myself the space and time to fully digest this. As a rapper, I will freely admit I got into Aesop Rock late, and it took a while to fully absorb his dense production and even more dense and layered rhymes and content, but the Impossible Kid took two big steps towards accessibility in 2016, and it wound up being one of my favorite hip-hop albums of that year, and one I still return to regularly to this day. And what I really admired was the change in tone. Many of his projects could have a heavyset grimness that could be really dirty and thick, and it could be kind of hard to process if you weren't in the right mindset. And yet for as creative of a wordsmith as Aesop Rock was, I really liked the steps towards a more varied tone, if not precisely a lighter one, that came on the Impossible Kid. And that takes us to TOBACCO. Signed to indie label Anticon, he's a psychedelic funk electronic producer and frontman of the critically acclaimed band Black Moth Super Rainbow. Now, they've worked with Aesop Rock before, over 10 years ago. Aesop Rock even brought a verse to their breakout single Dirt, but here they've teamed up for a full collaborative album that looked to bring a very different, borderline silly tone to bear, at least on the surface. And I'll admit that Aesop Rock looking to bring a little bit more levity to bear, this could be really fun. So, what do we get with Malibu Ken? Well, we got a pretty damn great album, that's for one, and exactly the sort of project that shows how Aesop Rock is aging gracefully into relative accessibility increasingly well in both his imagery and his storytelling. But then he's gonna pair it with TOBACCO's warped gurgling mire of off-key keening synths and limited beats. In other words, it is absolutely an acquired taste if you can't wrap your head around the production, and it did take a long time for me to truly sink into it, but it's absolutely the first great hip-hop album of 2019, and probably one that will have a solid shot at a lot of year-end lists regardless. It's a great project, I really enjoyed it. And we're gonna have to start with Aesop Rock himself. And I'll say this, I'm not sure what has inspired his pivot in recent years to slightly more immediately understandable narratives and storytelling, but it's a great step regardless of motive, mostly because he is so damn creative with his poetry and wordplay. Yeah, I wouldn't quite say that Malibu Ken is quite as personal as the fantastic cuts at the core of the Impossible Kid, but Aesop Rock can still mine an impressive amount of detail out of relatively mundane occurrences, with a brand of writing that exposes it all with strikingly vivid detail. And sure, a big part of all this is because Aesop Rock has such a huge vocabulary for storytelling, but his ability to mine real pathos out of what some might brand trivial observations is what gives his material so much punch, even when the stories he's telling are not his own. The most obvious standard is the lead-off single Acid King, a retelling of the Ricky Kasso murder of Gary Lauwers back in the mid-80s, soaked in the iconography of the newest satanic panic and a lot of occultism that not only shows Aesop Rock's familiarity with some of that scene both then and now, but also throwing the uncomfortable questions of whether such a killing was more or less than what it could have appeared. Coaxed through a lot of drug abuse and a synth that encapsulates a weirdly dark but triumphant swell to that song. Definitely feels like it could have come out of the 80s. And yet, that's one of the most theatrical moments on this project. When this album digs into the weird, more personal crannies, it can hit some striking observations, like through the mundane exasperation of Tuesday with the persistence of mold and decay around his home, living things that thrive in his absence that are kinda gross, but Aesop Rock can at least somewhat respect their fecundity. And then we get a similar bleak observation on Churro, where Aesop Rock talks about the efforts taken to revitalize the bald eagle population in the US, and a few that nested in downtown Pittsburgh, where even a webcam was set up to marvel at their nest, only for a domesticated cat to be brought to that nest to be killed and eaten by the eagles. And given Aesop Rock's affinity for cats, you can't help but wonder how that pet's owner might feel in this sudden reversal of fortune, especially if that owner was checking out the webcam feed to cheer up on a bad day. But that's only the story on the surface. And it's kind of hard to ignore that Aesop Rock chose the bald eagle for a reason. There is some symbolism tied in there, so let's dig deeper into themes and subtext. Now, what I've always loved about Aesop Rock's more naturalistic framing is how he not only he doesn't pull punches, but that he can see the darker humor and human frailty and failings amidst breaking or broken systems. And it's impossible to ignore how how much of this rises into outright text across this project. Hey, look at the United States right now, how could it not? And yet, for as much of a hyper-detailed realist as Aesop Rock is, and how hermetic his own work can feel with the blur of intricate detail, as he himself admits on Corn Maze, he keeps his walls up, but he can also admit that his level of dejected obfuscation doesn't really drive change or pull in a bewildered mainstream audience, but there is a sense of empathy that courses through his work and gives it a prickly sort of texture. Like with Quelle Chris, he's more concerned with the ordinary people just trying to live and get by in the modern world than big statements on how things could change, but Aesop Rock's demographic is in a slightly different lane. He's talking to the oddballs, the shut-ins, the old punks, the skateboarding heshers, the folks who are closer to the edge of society and might be that much more at risk, but also that much more likely to survive whatever might come, even despite an increasingly sadistic police force who might turn a quick deli trip into a temple run, as he describes on Save Our Ship, the sort of very layered metaphor for both technological absorption and the draining exposure to a much more hostile outside world where any fall could be your last. And all this feels so much more real, where it is becoming so much harder to just fall in line and be normal, even as he references on the first verse of Dog Years, for some people, even if they protest, it's inevitable. And yet, he can't really exist in that more normal world to the same extent. And while to him it can feel like a hustle in multiple senses of the word, he draws a not entirely sympathetic comparison to himself to street magicians on Swordbox, and it's absolutely aging him or even killing him slowly, especially as on 1 + 1 = 13 shows his current run of bad luck and raises the unsettling question how much more the powerful really want to gamble with lives if their luck's as bad as his. And yet, Dog Years shows a frail comfort in that environment that he knows that many don't have. Many can't live like him, even if in a twisted way it can be just as self-destructive and draining to persist on that depressive edge, as highlighted on Corn Maze, Suicide Big Gulp, and especially Purple Moss, a haunted closing track that gives him a moment of weary respite as a lonely outcast amidst a much larger decaying world where he's constantly on the road, but one that can still dream of retirement. But all three cuts highlight how much of this is just being reinforced by his path, his career, his art, either from the tours that run long to the pain constantly highlighted through repeated exposure on his albums, a theme that also anchored a lot of The Impossible Kid, and one that holds the central decaying form of Malibu Ken together. But hey, in this world, for him, at least it's living. So yeah, a lot of meaty themes and so much wordplay that this review would be double its length if I tried to highlight it all. So what's keeping this album back? Well, to put it bluntly, it would probably come in some of the production. And yet not in terms of just being too alien or weird to work. Indeed, once you can sink into the off-kilter, buzzy wiriness of analog chiptune, there's a surprising amount of intricacy in the tonal balance and melodies and how they come off against Aesop Rock's flow. And the brisk pace of the album means that it's not getting bogged down. And while the best example of this comes on Acid King, as I already brought up, I also really like the pulsating but still gleaming sparkle of Save Our Ship and Suicide Big Gulp, or the locked-in oily gloss of 1 + 1 = 13, or the stuttering spiky click of Churro, or the buzzy shudder against the blurry fuzz of the vocal filters on Tuesday, most of which will sneak behind songs like Dog Years and Suicide Big Gulp to drive what might coalesce as a hook if Aesop Rock doesn't handle it himself. But as much as I admire the decaying warbles and appreciate how certain songs can still bring moments that shine all the starker through the contrast, I do have two pretty big issues with the production. The first comes in a lot of the beats, most of which are hemmed in, clicking pieces that rarely pick up much tension or punch in the low end. This project is far more reliant on Aesop Rock's delivery in order to drive that momentum, and there are definitely some points I could feel he could use a little bit more support from the groove. The second issue, bizarrely enough, comes in that once you grow accustomed to the sound, it doesn't really evolve or get quite as weird as it could. Yeah, the syncopation of the grooves against Aesop Rock's flow can feel kind of bizarre at points, and maybe I'm just a little spoiled by an ocean of hip-hop that takes as many risks at this project, if not more, but I was waiting for the moment of pure incomprehensibility that was so unheard of and alien to really challenge the audience, but there's a strange uniformity to some of these tones that can almost feel a little bit undercooked on certain songs. I was kind of wishing for a little bit more melodic development, but really, I'm nitpicking. Malibu Ken's an excellent album, another showcase from Aesop Rock, Rock that might not quite nail the deep-seated impact of his absolute best. Matching the emotional wallop of the middle section of The Impossible Kid would be damn near impossible for any artist, even one of Aesop Rock's caliber, but it's still really damn meaty and distinctive all the same. And like with Hella Personal Film Festival by Open Mike Eagle and Paul White, while there is a temptation to call this more of a side project or a collaboration, it's so thematically dense and hard-hitting that I want to consider it part of his main canon. It's certainly great enough in order to get there, and thus for me, very strong 8 out of 10, absolutely a recommendation. And while it might take a while to really peel into the textured, often grotesque crevices of Malibu Ken, what you find within, often pure gold. Don't want to miss this. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know this review took a little bit while for me to actually get to it, but I wanted to give this time to really sink into it. I'm so glad I did. You guys definitely want to hear this. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. You want to buy or stream the album, links down there below. And I got the poll up there if any of you guys want to tell me where you think about this album. I think a lot of people really like it, but don't quite love it. And really, this is one of those albums, it's gonna grow on you with time. Kind of like a fungus, and I think you'd appreciate that. And beyond that, you want to help support this channel, link to my Patreon right over there. And I'm still trying to rejigger how things are going to work out there, but I'm happy for any support all the same. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time. Got 5 bags back, still owes 50. Ricky, do we hound up a load or show him how to help out?